In 2021, an unexplained incident occurred off the coast of Norway. An important undersea data cable had been damaged, and no one could explain why.
Something was obviously seriously wrong. Nothing worked anymore. No instruments, no sensors. Where the cable was supposed to be, there was no cable. You just see mayhem.
At the bottom of the world's oceans lie an essential network of data cables. They stretch hundreds of thousands of miles around the world.
Information flow, communications, banking system, financial communications, it's a vast network and it's extremely vulnerable.
Damage to any of them could be catastrophic.
It could spread a panic, disrupt the normal functioning of states.
In the last few years, there have actually been a whole series of incidents involving undersea cables. These may not be freak accidents. They may actually be a sign of something more sinister. Sabotage. I first learned about this story in 2021. There's an ocean observatory in Norway that has a very important data cable. That data cable had suddenly stopped working. My first step was reaching out to Geir Peterson. He's a lead researcher at the laboratory, and his job is researching marine life using that data cable.
I got hooked on underwater sounds. One of the things about the ocean is that light doesn't travel far underwater. But using sound, then you're able to really truly see what happens underwater. With hydrophones, we're able to monitor the presence, absence of key marine mammals. They're very sensitive and have a wide frequency range, so they're able to pick up sounds from pretty far away. The humpback is sort of his personal favorite. These are parts of a humpback whale song. This is two sperm whales. We're able to pick out all the nuances of the sounds.
The observatory's instruments are located in the Norwegian Sea. The instruments are attached to a very long cable that runs 30 miles out to sea. But before the data is sent to the observatory, a very interesting thing happens.
We have this partnership with the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment. This observatory is not designed for defense purposes, but of course there is always the chance of picking up things that we're not necessarily interested in.
Every vessel in the ocean makes noise, whether that's the RPM of the propeller blades to the hum of the engine. Those noises create what is essentially a unique fingerprint of the vessel. And those fingerprints can be used to determine whether the vessel is a fishing trawler or something else that you can't see. What the Norwegian military does with this information is redacts any sensitive data before passing it along to the observatory. Even though this cable is used for purely scientific research, it could be considered a threat to adversaries to NATO.
On April 6th, when we came into the office, the chief technical officer for the observatory noticed that the power was off.
Came to work, I opened the data portal, and I found the data froze around the 3rd of April. So then I know something was not working in the last several days.
The observatory's first step was to try and reboot the computers where the cable comes to shore. That happens in the remote fishing village of Hovden in far western Norway. The cables are actually routed into a small hut, which is looked after by 2 local shark fishermen, guys who are actually brothers. To be honest, this is not the most securely defended place I've ever seen. When they got inside, they were able to reboot the system successfully. The problem was, there was still no data flowing from the cable. That made it clear that something far more serious had happened. It was Gusong who first noticed an anomaly along the cable's path further out to sea.
The first thing come to my head, maybe the fiber connector fell off. So we dived to see what happened there.
So we're getting the live feed from the ROV as it dives down to the seafloor. And from this angle, everything looks pretty good. So now we're moving around to the other side. And that's where we see that, okay, well, there is no cable. I guess that was sort of the most shocking. Okay, here, something really serious have happened here.
Given the scale of the damage, it became clear that this was something far more grave.
The first thing that went through my mind, that someone has trawled in this area, someone has snagged this cable and moved it far away.
Fishing is very common in the area. Many of them are trawlers, and the way they catch fish is using a large net that's connected to two giant steel trawler doors. The initial theory was that these trawler doors somehow snagged the cable and dragged it away. To establish if this was the case, the observatory staff turned to ship tracking data.
Yusong worked a bit to try to figure out, what could have happened and where could the cable actually be now.
So I collected some boat data. I see quite a lot of ship traffic in that area. After sorting one by one, I saw that only one boat crossed the cable that time. This boat could be a potential candidate.
If this theory was right, the tracking data of the vessel's route could help locate the missing cable. And if they could recover the cable, they could potentially figure out who damaged it and why. This was about 6 months after the cable had been originally damaged, and the team was able to send another underwater drone to the location on the seafloor where they thought the missing cable might be. And the theory was right. They found the missing cable exactly along the vessel's path. When they brought the cable back to shore, Geir and Gusong made a very disturbing discovery.
This is the cable, and at this end you can see a very clear and precise cut, which was man-made.
All along, they've been working on the assumption that the damage to the cable was accidental. Seeing the cut, they were left with only one conclusion. This was intentional.
And then Norwegian police came.
My name is Ronny Jørgensen. I work as a police prosecutor. It's a crucial piece of evidence. It was pretty clear that it has been cut with some sort of a tool. It tells me that it has been at the surface, or at least up close to the surface, and then cut.
At this point in the investigation, it was unclear whether the vessel had set out to damage the cable. Maybe this incident had started as an accident and the crew had cut the cable in order to cover it up. Or maybe it was always an intentional act of sabotage. The police simply didn't know. To find out, the police set out to interview the crew of the ship that had crossed over the cable at the time of the incident.
One vessel that had a very deviant pattern. This vessel was a trawler fishing vessel from our neighbor country in the east.
The vessel's name? The Sami. It's a Russian fishing trawler that mostly operates in the waters above Norway and Russia. Despite the tensions between Europe and Russia, there still are some areas of cooperation, especially with regard to fishing. Russian fishing vessels often dock in Norwegian waters, whether to change crews, unload their catches, or repair their ships. So the next time the Sami docked in Tromsø, police boarded the ship and questioned the captain and crew.
When they came to Tromsø, we spoke to a couple of the crew members, and these interviews stated that they hadn't seen any cables in their catch.
As part of our investigation, we managed to track down the owner of the Sami, a man named Sergei Saigonov. He insisted to us that his boat was not involved. That left investigators with three potential explanations. One, maybe the Sami wasn't involved, despite the fact that data showed it crossed the cable at the time it was damaged. Two, maybe the Sami was responsible, but it had begun as an accident, and someone on board cut the cable to cover up the mistake. Or number three, maybe somebody on board the Sami had always intended to sabotage this cable.
The fishermen would definitely remember if a catch included a marine cable. So we cannot conclude that there is a connection between this fishing vessel and cutting of the cable.
It's conceivable that this all could have begun as an accident, that fishermen had cut the cable because their boat had become entangled. What's far less likely is that there would be more than one of these incidents in the same time period. And yet that's exactly what happened. Svalbard is an archipelago in the far north. It's a Norwegian territory, but there's a fraught history there between Norway and Russia. The archipelago is home to just 2,000 people who share the space with polar bears and a very important satellite installation.
So the incident with the Svalbard cable happened 7 months after the lava cable was disrupted. There are two cables that are connecting Svalbard archipelago with the mainland Norway, and one of them just stopped working. It transports all, internet communications. But what is also important with these cables is that they transport information that is being gathered from the satellites that are orbiting the poles. So huge amounts of very important data that is being transported through these cables.
We knew that we had to go down there to see with our own eyes.
So when they reached the seafloor, what they found was that this cable had essentially been broken open, not cut in half. But they did find something that bore a strange similarity to what had happened with the Ocean Observatory's cable.
In the area of the Svalbard cable, you could see tracks on the seabed, deep tracks, definitely man-made.
When police looked at the ship tracking data, they found something alarming. A Russian fishing trawler called the Melkart 5 had passed over this cable more than 130 times in the days before the cable was damaged. But once again, there wasn't enough evidence to pursue a criminal case.
My area of responsibility stretches up to the North Pole. The amounts of fishing boats and the size of the water means that you cannot do effective investigation.
The inability to prosecute, to be certain about the culprits and actually prosecute them, shows to me the capability that Russia has and the difficulty of dealing with this kind of asymmetrical warfare. The Russian doctrine is quite clear that in a potential confrontation, this kind of infrastructure will be attacked at the very early stage of a conflict.
The defense community is deeply concerned about the threat that Russia's military poses in the Arctic. With the melting of the polar ice caps, the Arctic is becoming more important geopolitically. New shipping and transit lanes are opening, and the area is rich in natural resources. This has led some security experts to conclude that these cable incidents are not likely accidental.
I think that the probability is that an intentional damage is very high. It could be, I think, 50-50, either sabotage and sending a signal or just training. And even if we look away from this case, there have been so many others.
There have been reported incidents of Russian fishing and research vessels being outfitted with military and surveillance equipment. One recent investigation documented what appeared to be military hardware on a vessel that was supposed to be conducting civilian research. One of the unanswered questions about the Ocean Observatory incident is why would Russia want to attack this scientific cable?
So one possibility is that they were training. They're getting ready to attack this kind of infrastructure in a potential conflict situation. It could be also a mean of a pressure on a country to say, let's just behave. It's a great question why Russia would use fishing on civilian ships. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russian military was in a complete disarray. The Russian military went from being one of the strongest militaries in the world to a degradation of historical proportions. Russia came to a conclusion that they are having a hard time catching up with the West militarily, and therefore unconventional warfare and non-military ways and means will still have to play an important part. This kind of quiet war, so interference in elections, export of corruption, influencing political parties, attacking critical infrastructure is part of that full pillar of the Russian non-military ways and means. There has been a lot of awareness that this is a problem, but also perhaps a certain degree of naivety, especially as sabotage in peacetime, at least formal peacetime, as we understand it in the West. We like to think about conflict as very separated. So peace, crisis, and conflict in Russia is much more fluid.
Regardless of whether these two incidents might have begun as accidents or not, what they show is that underwater infrastructure is extremely vulnerable. The high north is so remote and so vast that I have no idea how anybody can be expected to protect all of it.
It is very difficult to monitor large areas of underwater. We don't have the technology, we don't have the methods to control or have full oversight of what is happening. If someone wants to destroy it and they have the equipment, it's fairly easy to do.